I'm delighted that so many of you, it's actually 502 now, so many of you are taking part today. Although it's a beautiful day and you could go out and have a lovely walk in the sunshine, but you're taking part in the session. And I'm very happy also that the work that Tetiana and her team started several years ago together with the various players in Ukraine, like the British Council and Cambridge University Press and Cambridge Assessment, that this has, I think, really brought some excellent results. And when I look at these beautiful messages that you're writing there in the chat box, and you're saying that you're happy with the materials and the materials that Tetiana and her team have created, that is aimed at supporting you, then this is a wonderful feeling for me to be part of this process. I would obviously much prefer to be there with you today in person, but as we know, this is not possible right now. So it's going to be a webinar, and I hope there will be some ideas for you. Some new ideas also for you. I'll be talking about the importance of stories in teaching young learners. And, well, I can only hope that you agree that stories are important when it comes to the teaching of English to young learners. So what I'd like to do is I would like to start this session with a little warm-up question. I'd like to give you a minute or two. And would you please just type into the chat box one or two of your main reasons for using stories with young learners? Okay, so take a moment and then just give us a sentence or, you know, even half a sentence. Our learners enjoy learning English with Quick Minds characters. Okay. As a motivational tool to engage the pupils, to expand their vocabulary, to engage them. Stories catch their attention and gain their interest. Introduction of new words, new grammar to motivate, to develop their imagination, personalization, values, critical thinking. Ooh, it's getting fast now. To encourage them, develop their imagination, their creativity, to engage them, to develop critical thinking, boost speaking, to develop creativity and speaking listening skills, for motivation, for developing skills, and so on and so forth. Lovely. Thank you so much. So let me give you a little overview of what we are doing here in this session today. I will start out by discussing why stories fascinate children. But of course, not only children, stories fascinate people of all ages. So whether you are 7 or 71, a good story will actually inspire you and fascinate you. We will look at the fact that stories make language memorable, and something that is very important, if you teach a group of students and you share your students' mother tongue, then the language classroom where you want them to talk English as much as possible is a little bit artificial, at least initially, because of course they could talk to you much more easily in their mother tongue. They would understand you better if you spoke your mother tongue. So stories, in a way, are a very natural means of getting learners to make meaning of the new language they're learning. Stories, as one of you have said, help us with conveying values to our students. There are other aspects, of course, that are equally important. I totally agree with you. I'm just not focusing on them for time reasons today. Like you mentioned, creativity. Tatiana is just mentioning this now. Some of you have mentioned critical thinking and other aspects. I'm not going to focus on them today. I will be focusing also on how we can select stories. So if you want to tell stories that are not part of Quick Minds or any other course book, if you want to use some additional stories, how you can select them, what kind of quality parameters there are, and also how you can create stories yourself. Some of us, I'm sure, love, if you have a young child, for example, or if you have, like me, I have a grandchild, and sometimes I create stories for him. And these are usually the stories that are most popular with children. And I will also give you some practical tips on how to work with stories, also on what to do once you have worked on a story, for example, also in Quick Minds. Okay, so I would like to look at stories from a wider perspective first, and I would like to talk a little bit about the importance of stories in our cultural history. We know that stories have been around since language has been around. When we look at cave paintings, for example, these are beautiful cave paintings, aren't they? What they do is they tell a story, okay? And I'm using this image on purpose for one particular reason, because scientists and educational psychologists have actually started to discover, so brain scientists and educational psychologists have started to discover that very, very young children, so preschool children, go through certain stages in their development that are very similar to the stages we went through as humans in our own history. So Kieran Egan, in his book, Primary Understanding, Education in Early Childhood, stresses that there are some similarities between some forms of thinking that is evident in adult oral cultures, in so-called primitive cultures, if I may say that are of course not primitive, but they haven't developed reading and writing yet, and in children's thinking. And of course, very young children also can't read and write yet. So it's fascinating to look at these two, at so-called primitive cultures, oral cultures, and what goes on in a preschool child's thinking. And that helps us a little bit to understand the importance of stories. Stories go far beyond language. Stories are, of course, important. I totally agree with those of you who've said they can help us teach new vocabulary and teach new structures. But stories have importance that goes far beyond that. And this is something I would like to look at a little bit theoretically first. When we look at this child here, a toddler, maybe 3 years old, 4 years old, what we can tell is that she is fascinated by sounds. Children, very, very young children, love sounds. They love sounds. They love all kinds of sound effects when they watch, for example, a cartoon story for very young children. And we have those sound effects. They just love them. They get totally drawn into the story because of the audio, because of the sound. And this is a quotation from an anthropologist named Ong. This was published by Routledge in 2002, and he says that all sounds are inherently powerful. And again, goes back to looking at oral cultures thousands of years ago. If a hunter kills a lion, he can see it, touch it, feel it, and smell it. But if he hears a lion, he must act fast, because the sound of the lion signals its presence and its power. Speech is a form of sound that shares this common power. A text can be ignored. A text written on paper, that is, okay? It's just writing on paper. But to ignore speech, to ignore sounds, can be unwise. Our basic instincts compel us to pay attention. So this inspiration, this motivation, this attention that learners pay comes from the kind of importance of sounds. And this goes back to our roots of civilization. Sounds are so important because we need to listen to sounds, because sounds tell us about the world around us. And some sounds warn us about the world around us. And this is why it's deeply rooted in our cultural history that we listen to sounds and listen to stories. Another question for you. What would you say are the ingredients of a good story for children? Some of you are saying the stories in quick minds, and I love hearing that. Thank you. So what are the ingredients? What are the elements? What should be in a good story? There's a typo there, and I don't know what it means, actually. Pictures, yes. It needs to be positive. Basic lexis. Interesting plot. Intonation, characters. Heroes. Interjections, illustrations, pictures, interesting plot, pictures need to be cool, humor, dreams, inspirations, interesting characters, pictures, characters, funny situations, some jokes, a plot, colors, humor, exciting characters, good and bad, interesting, heroes, humor, a happy ending. Okay, lovely. Thank you so much. There is a lot of food for thought there. Okay, I'd now like to go from anthropology, where I used some insights from anthropology to elaborate on why stories are so important for humans. I would like to go a little bit into brain research, okay? And I would like to say that from a neurobiological point of view, the brain is wired for stories. Well, what does that mean? Let me start with a quotation. This comes, or not with a quotation, sorry, with a few facts. There is a fascinating book by Lisa Krohn, and the book is titled Wired for Story. And she talks about the brain, the human brain, and the fact that our human brain is built in such a way that it actually needs stories. Okay? And a few facts first. The brain receives 11 million bits of sensory information while listening to a simple sentence. And this is enormous. While the conscious mind is capable of registering only 40 of them and able to process between 5 and 7 bits of data at a time. So we have this enormous discrepancy in a way that when we are listening to a story, there is so much sensory information, but it is actually story that helps us focus on what is really important there. So in other words, the reason why our children are so fascinated with stories, and they all are, lies in the story itself. And if it's a good story, they will remember more, and if it's not, they will remember less. So let's carry on with some insights from Lisa Krohn, who says that our brain is overloaded, isn't it? When you look at these facts that I've just presented, we have to say that the brain is overloaded. But why is story so important to the brain? The reason our already overloaded brain devotes so much precious time and space to allowing us to get lost in a story is that without stories, we'd be toast. I don't know if you've come across the term or the phrase, we'd be toast. In other words, we would be lost, okay? We would not exist as humans without stories. Stories allow us to stimulate intense experiences without actually having to live through them. So this is a key thought. Stories are more than just language. Stories help us with interpreting life, okay? So a good story stimulates experiences in our brain. We learn from good stories without having to live through all the experiences that the protagonists in a story make. This was a matter of life and death back in the Stone Age, when if you waited for experience to teach you that the rustling in the bushes was actually a lion looking for lunch, you'd end up the main course. In other words, imagine two Stone Age people sitting with their group in a cave, and they're having a barbecue, they're having an open fire, eating a bison leg. And then two of them say, well, you know, we would love to have some dessert. And everybody else says, sorry, there is no dessert today. And they say, no, we're going down to the river. There is this bush with those sweet berries, and we'll come back and we'll pick some berries, and we can all have dessert. So they leave, they go out of the cave, and they don't come back for 1 hour, for 2 hours, for 3 hours. And then after 4 hours, one of them comes back, and his face is white as a sheet. And he's trembling like this. Now, of course, everybody immediately knows something has happened, right? And what will happen next? Storytelling. The guy says, you cannot imagine what happened. We had just gone out of the cave, and when we went round the bend, all of a sudden what we saw was this huge animal. Let's say it was a saber-toothed tiger, okay? And unfortunately, killed the other friend. Now, he's telling them a story, but the story is not about entertainment. It's not a story where the others say, oh, wow, thank you so much, that was a great story. The purpose of the story is, of course, for the brain to learn something about this danger, that there is this new dangerous animal in the environment, and they've all got to be careful if they want to survive. Okay? So this is Lisa Cron's idea that a story is a story only if there is something in this story that helps us with survival, that helps us learn something that goes beyond language. Okay? Let's look a little bit further. This is Kieran Egan, educational philosopher, professor of education at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. And he has written a book which is fascinating. It's called Teaching as Storytelling. It's not a book for language teachers. It's a general educational book. And he says the story form is a cultural universal. Everyone, everywhere enjoys stories. The story then is not just some casual entertainment. It reflects a basic and powerful form in which we make sense of the world and experience. So our children love stories only if there is something in a story that helps them understand something better about the world. Because otherwise, we will have a story where we pack an important lexical set into the story and some important structures into the story, but the story itself is lousy. Well, our learners will not say, you know, this is fantastic. We have a story here with interesting words and interesting structures, so I need to pay attention. No. Learners will pay attention if there is something in this story that the brain recognizes as important. And values, as somebody is just saying in the chat box, are one aspect which is so important for children when it comes to stories. Okay? Back to Lisa Cron. Remember, she was talking about Stone Age and the importance of stories because they helped them survive. And she says, story is even more crucial now because once we mastered the physical world, our brain evolved to tackle something far trickier, the social realm. Story evolved as a way to explore our own mind and the mind of others as a sort of dress rehearsal for the future. As a result, story helps us survive not only in the life and death physical sense, but also in a life well-lived social sense. And here are your values, ladies and gentlemen. Several of you have said values are important, and I couldn't agree more. And this is the reason, explained so well by Lisa Cron, why stories are so important. So stories help children to make sense of the world. And of course, children, but not only children, also us, when you go to a good movie and you watch a good film, you identify with the protagonists, right? So we experience the adventures they are going through. So we identify with the protagonists. And the children experience a story as if it was happening, it was really happening to them now, okay? In short, stories teach us lessons that help us survive. Survive, as I've already said, not only physically, but also survive socially. Okay? Lisa Cron. When a story meets our brain's criteria, we relax and slip into the protagonist's skin, eager to experience what his or her struggle feels like, without having to leave the comfort of home. And we know this. Those of us who are avid readers, you know what it's like when it's long past midnight and you're lying in bed or you're sitting in an armchair and you're reading, and you can't put that book down. It's not because there are so many beautiful words in this book. It is because there is something in this book that your brain interprets as relevant. There's something there that is seen as important by our brain. Okay? And the last quotation, I think, from Lisa Krohn, as counterintuitive as it may sound, the story is not about the plot or even what happens in it. Stories are about how we, rather than the world around us, change. They grab us only when they allow us to experience how it would feel to navigate that plot. So the best plot can be lost on you if it doesn't mean much to you. This is why some stories speak to some of us and don't speak to others, okay? Thus, a story, Lisa Krohn says, is an internal journey, not an external one. And this is a key point for me as an author of language teaching materials. Stories in language teaching materials have to be good stories. Stories need to offer the child something beyond language. Of course, the lexical sets are important. Of course, the structures are important. Of course, the chunks of language and language functions are important. But if the story doesn't speak to our learners, if there is nothing in the story that gives them insight about the world, then they will not actually learn a lot from the story, okay? So, Kieran Egan, in his book Teaching as Storytelling, stresses also that stories are important because they develop what he calls cognitive tools, okay? They help develop, some of you said critical thinking. They help develop our child's understanding of the world, okay? And we also know, Kieran Egan talks about children going through a quality of understanding that he calls mythic understanding, okay? So for the child, and we know that, when you tell them a story, there is no border between reality and imagination. They know, of course, it's a story. But when you tell them the story and they're really drawn into it, the story is real. And reality becomes imagination, and imagination becomes reality, and the two somehow become dovetailed in one another. And there's one more point. We all know what good stories are. You know that when you have a young child and you read them a story, and you know what it's like when they are really getting drawn into it. The question is, that's another question. Where can we find such unusual stories for teenagers? Good question. Well, search for Herbert Puchta and the many stories I've written for teenagers also. But seriously, have a look also when you're a teacher of teenagers. Have a look at Think. This is my course book for teenagers. For teenagers, you need very, very different quality criteria than the quality criteria I'm sharing with you now. But one thing is the same. They also will only be interested in a story if the story helps them understand the world. So identity and values are very, very important for teenagers. But back to young learners. Good stories follow a certain structure, and it goes beyond the teaching of important language. And this is what we're going to look at now. I'm sorry, a few of you I've seen that are saying they have a bad connection. I can only say I have excellent broadband connection here. And I'm sorry, you know, I mean, we're living at a phase in our lives when so many people need the internet and are working from home and are learning from home. So sometimes the connection can be very bad. I know from Tetiana that they will store this talk online. So if you have a poor connectivity now, maybe you can watch it later at another point of time when you have a better connection. That's all I can say. So stories and their structure. What are the ingredients? What is quality about a story for young learners? Okay. So first of all, they need a relatively simple structure: a beginning, a middle, and an end. And one thing is important: somewhere at the end of the beginning phase, there needs to be a problem, okay? There needs to be some conflict. There needs to be some problem. And then in the middle, the story deals with various aspects of how this problem could be solved. And in the end, somebody said, we need a happy ending. Yes, absolutely. So the conflict needs to be resolved. Story magic is the second aspect here. So a story for children needs to have something magic in it, whether it's animals that can speak, whether it's like the protagonists in the first two levels of Quick Minds, where one of them, Flash, is the world's fastest runner, where another one is so strong and can pick up cars even, where another one can talk to animals, whisper, and another one can make herself invisible. These are magic kind of capabilities, okay? And they are heroes because of these magic capabilities. And they can use their magic capabilities to solve problems, as we know. And children who love these stories, of course, discover that they have great capabilities too. So in their imagination, they develop capabilities. And this is the beauty of such stories, okay? Yes. Flash, thunder, whisper, and misty, okay? And then something unexpected needs to happen, and that's the problem, and it needs to be resolved in the end, okay? So that's the structure of good stories for children. And then, of course, values. Values are the principles that help us form judgments, okay? On whether something is good or bad, on whether something is right or wrong, a behavior, an action, what a person says, what a person does. This is what values are all about, okay? And of course, there are many different kinds of values: moral values and environmental values. Do you like my photo here? I took this myself in the Kalahari Desert in sub-Saharan Africa, and these are swallow-tailed bee eaters. I love these birds. They're beautiful. Okay, good. Now, anyway, democratic values, unfortunately, not. These are not values that everybody has the pleasure to share in some countries, as we know. But of course, I think that's something we agree on, that democratic values are important. So health values, thank you for the compliment on my photograph. Art values, and of course there are others, but I've chosen values that are generally kind of like called general values, so global values, because most people actually believe they are important, okay? And of course, how can we teach values? Well, modals won't do the job. When you say to a learner, you shouldn't do this, you must do that, you should do this, you ought to, you ought not, you mustn't, you can't, then often what happens is that things go in one ear and out the other, okay? And learners don't learn from these sentences where we use deictic modals, as important they are in language teaching, okay? So there are basically two ways how to teach values. First one is we as teachers need to walk our talk. So if you want your learners to sit still and focus their attention, it's no good if you say, okay, everyone, I want you to sit still now, really focus your attention, sit still and listen carefully. Well, we're saying sit still, but we are communicating, move fast. And of course, this is what influences our learners. So our own congruent model of behavior is important. If we want our children to be good listeners, we have to be good listeners ourselves. If we want our children to be passionate about learning, we have to be passionate about teaching. Okay? This is reciprocal. We will get a mirror of our own behavior if we are congruent from our students. And the second one, the use of good stories. Stories in all cultures and in all countries around the world have been used for centuries to convey values to young people. Okay? So let's talk about the methodology of using course book stories. I've promised to say a few things about how to use stories, and of course I want to talk about Quick Minds a little and how we can use the stories. People often ask, do I need to pre-teach all the words from the story? I would say no. Pre-teach key vocabulary only. Or sometimes even don't pre-teach vocabulary, especially if you have the videos, because the moving pictures, of course, help your learners to make meaning of language, and often they understand language without remembering all the new words, and you can work on them later on, but they will understand the story. The second one is we need to do what I call advanced organizing. So lead our learners into a story because the brain needs that. The better you can lead into a story, thanks for the beautiful compliment, yeah? Through an advanced organizing task, the better for your learners. I will come back and I'll make a few suggestions in a minute. Oh, here we are. Examples of such lead-in activities. Write down a few keywords on the board. For example, Lucy, Ben, underwater, problem. And say to your learners, look at these words, call out more words that come to mind when you look at these words. In other words, give me associations, give me the words that come to mind when you think of these words on the board. And I am at the board, I write down these words, and then I say to my learners, okay, now can we try and make a story together out of these words or some of these words? And I help them, of course. Maybe I give them a sentence beginning initially, a story beginning, and then I wait for them. Often you can see that one of them wants to say something, and then I ask them and I help them, and we create a story together. This is beautiful. And this is not the story that they will have in the book, okay? So they call out maybe, I don't know, fish and somebody else calls out gold, and somebody else calls out boat, and somebody else calls out something else, and then we create a story together. Or another next suggestion, I ask my learners to take a book. I'll just take any of my books here. To take their course book, in your case, Quick Minds, and open it at page, say, where's the story here? 66. And I say, put in a pen like this. So you can always open and close it quickly, but leave the pen in it. I'm giving you 10 seconds now. When I say go, you open your book, you look at the pictures, you look at the language, and try and remember as much as you can in 10 seconds only. And they will go, first of all, they will say, I will not be able to do that. But then you say, no, try this, okay? So you give them, you say, ready, steady, go! And they open their book, they look at the story, and they have 10 seconds, and after that I say, stop, close your book, call out words. And again, I write words on the board, so we get lots of words on the board, and in the end, I ask them again, let's make a story together, okay? Finally, another suggestion, bring an object to class, in this case, a diving mask or a snorkel, and ask them, maybe again, do a brainstorming, ask them to call out words, or you say, can you tell me what you think we're going to learn today? And you can must help them, of course. Maybe some of them will say one or two things in their mother tongue. You help them, you write that on the board. So you're leading them into the story, and this is called advanced organizing, okay? So another thing I do is I ask them one or two global questions first before they read a story or before they listen to a story, okay? So a global question, a general question. For example, not you don't ask a story for a detail. That's for later. But a global story, for example, a global question. For example, you can say, who are the people in the story? Or where are the people in the story? Or what is the problem for the people in the story? Okay, so a global question first, and later we will look at details, okay? Please, please, please use the videos to support comprehension, okay? I'll show you one video in a minute. And my next point is revisit the stories regularly. Sometimes, and I know you all have time pressure, but sometimes teachers teach stories and they never go back to the story. While, of course, we need to revisit the story to help our learners remember language from the story. And I'm showing you just one technique today. The story I want to actually focus on is this one here. This is from... I think it's Quick Minds 4, if I'm not wrong. And I'll just play you the video now. I hope, I'm sorry, some of you, of course, the ones who have poor connectivity, you will not be able to follow the story well as a video. But I've seen somebody said here, I think it was Tatiana, I'm not sure, that you can download the video actually. So if you're interested, you can watch it or watch it again. So here we have the, where's the, Tatiana, help me. I need the video. Tatiana, I don't see the video here.
I'm here. Okay, you go to documents on the control panel.
Up there, video and audio. I'm sorry.
Yes,
You told
yes,
me.
it's there.
That was silly. Yes, thank you.
No,
So here we go. Here we go.
I can't see a letter.
Hey, what about that big shell?
Good idea.
Let's have a look.
Is there a letter in the shell?
No, there isn't.
Let's look in a different place.
Help, Lucy! I can't get my arm out.
Okay, we'll stop it here. I'm going. Well, I've stopped it already. Anyway, okay, and we're going back to the keynote. Yeah, okay. So there have been a few questions. I'm sorry, some of you obviously had no sound. I can only tell you that the videos, of course, have sound. I'm sorry if this hadn't worked very well for some of you. Okay, sound is okay. Somebody else is saying okay. Good. Well, how often do I read the stories with my learners? Maybe 2 or 3 times, but that's not the most important one. The most important one is that you do not just revisit the stories through reading. You want to focus on the important chunks of language in there, okay? For example, have a look at this. It says here, I can't see a letter. Hey, what about that big shell? Okay, let's have a look. So what I do later, have a look at this, is I use what I call a chunks generator. In other words, you give your students sentences from the story, sentences that have important language, but you take out one word from each sentence and you write it in the margin, and then you ask your learners and say, give me this sentence without leaving a gap here. This is far more powerful because they have to think more. And because they have to think more, they will remember the sentence or the chunk of language better. They will, where is the presenter? I am here. Tatiana, do you need to do something about me? Okay, all is good. Thank you. So they reconstruct these sentences, and by doing so, they will remember the language better. And now, of course, when you tell stories, so I'm saying use the stories in the book, but also tell other stories. Tell anecdotes from your holidays, stories from your own childhood. Use simplified stories, the little stories that you can get also from publishing houses. Stories you create yourself, and use modern tales, real stories about real people, human interest stories. This is more for teenagers already, okay? So, 5 tips for telling stories before we finish. We tell stories all the time in our lives. Enjoy telling stories in class. I'm sorry, there's one L missing. There's a typo here. Make the storytelling process as dramatic and emotionally engaging as possible. Use images, drawings, mime and gesture. Have eye contact with your students. Use rhythm and volume of voice. And make pauses every now and then. This makes your storytelling more dramatic. When children enjoy a story, they often want to hear it several times, tell it more than once, and encourage the learners to actively join in. So tell the story again, start a sentence, and pause. And let your learners say the next word or the next words. Children love acting out stories. If you have the right stories, get them to change them and act them out. And revisit stories and the language in them frequently and over a longer period of time. Use techniques like the one I showed you called the chunks generator. Okay? So we've been looking at the reason why children are fascinated with stories. Been looking at how we can work with stories using our course books, the importance of stories for the development of our children's cognition. We have discussed what is a good story for children and what are the criteria for selecting or creating stories. Remember, I said, you know, a good structure like beginning, middle, end, etc., etc. And we have shared 5 tips for telling stories. And this is the end of today's session. Okay. Well, thank you very much. And here we go back to Tetiana. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I can't say how happy I am that we had you today. It's like, I don't know, I had so much inspiration, and I'm sure that everybody feels that as well, because I don't know how you're doing it, just through the screen, I really felt I'm so inspired. So yeah.
Thank you. That's kind of you.
Thanks a lot. Stories will definitely help us survive. And I saw a few questions from our teachers. Maybe you could support them a little bit, because I remember once upon a time someone asked you at the face-to-face seminar, someone asked you, what do I do? I have 30 students in the classroom and it's too much. There are too many students. And I remember you told them a story about how you had 80 students, 80 Spanish students, and how it worked then.
Look,
and
in many parts of the world, teachers have very large classrooms. But one of the things that really works well, even with large classes, is storytelling. Of course, I currently teach again a group of 10-year-olds. I've been teaching them for 4 years now. I don't have 80 kids in that classroom, okay? But when I travel the world, I'm not currently doing this, and I work with teachers, say, in some African countries, there are sometimes a lot of students in their classes. I agree with you that this is challenging in terms of classroom management. But stories are actually a very good means of working with large classes too.
Yeah, thank you. And I also saw one of the, I can't say questions, but I'd call it a requirement for advice. We have 3 lessons in the 2nd grade, and we have 2 lessons per week in the 1st grade. And starting from the 2nd grade, there are 3 lessons of English. And teachers feel like it's too little, and they need more time to. Well, of course, it would be perfect to have all the time of English, but still, maybe there is something you can.
I would like to say something. In my own country, Austria, teachers in primary school only have 1 lesson a week from year 1 to year 4, and that is really very, very, very little. If you have 2 lessons in year 1 and 3 lessons as from year 2, that's not so bad, actually. I mean, I think what we need to do is, it depends a lot on how we teach. We need to take small steps with our learners, but we need to work at a fast pace. So we revise a lot, and our learners' language really grows step by step. We must not forget to revise language. Revision is something that is often forgotten. But if you have 2 lessons in year 1 and 3 in years 2, 3, and 4, that's that's not so bad. I mean, my own class where I teach currently, and I teach this class only because my grandson is in it. Okay, so I knew, you know, he was not going to have a lot of English, so I went to the ministry and I said, look, I'm going to teach this class for free if you allow me to teach them 3 lessons a week rather than the usual 1 lesson. So I've been teaching this group. They are in year 4 now. I've been teaching them 3 hours every week. Not every week, because when I travel, I'm not always there, as you can imagine. But now, thanks to COVID, I have been there regularly, either online or currently I'm back in the classroom. And of course, this is better than only 2 lessons a week. There's no doubt. But we can still achieve quite a lot also with 2 lessons a week. Of course, every teacher wants more all the time. And this just means that you are ambitious as a teacher and you want your children to achieve as much as possible. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so true. But it's also true that we need to find the ways how to be happy with what we have, and how to make the best of what we have.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
This is something about our approach to life, I guess. And I was really interested in that book you were mentioning, Lisa Korn, and I see someone also
it's Lisa Kron.
Lisa.
I've written
Lisa
it down
Kron.
here.
Mhm.
And the book is called Wired for Story. It's not a language teaching book. Don't expect that, okay? But it's about the brain and stories, and what is important about stories. Fantastic book.
Yeah, those quotations are amazing, and I loved it a lot.
Yes.
Okay, is there if there are any other questions from the teachers? Just compliments.
That's lovely. I'm going to blush now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think it's my turn to say thank you so much. I've enjoyed working with you. Thank you for being so active in the chat, and I wish you great lessons. I wish you great storytelling lessons, and I hope that some of the ideas I shared with you today will inspire you in working with your children. Hope to see you again one day, and maybe in person, which would be great. Thank you.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
yes, that would be great. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next time on
Bye.
Cambridge Day in Ukraine.
Bye-bye.
Okay.